What's going on, everybody? This is Drew and JC. We are back with another episode of Comedy Watchers. Uh, we have a pretty interesting guest tonight. I'm looking forward to learning about him and what he does. And I'll let him introduce himself. And you know it after the intro.
So perfect timing to take a drink, Drew.
Well, I thought the audience was going to keep going for a couple of more seconds. So
The pre-programmed clap that you added in here know exactly how long it goes for.
yeah. Well, I got a little thirsty. It's been a long day, but we have a guest we're going to let introduce himself now instead of calling me out on my questionable diet soda moment. Patrick, go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody and kind of tell them what you do.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Patrick Golden. I hail from the great state of Texas. I'm from Houston, and I currently am based in Brooklyn, New York. I'm basically a working stand-up comic. I perform in all five boroughs: Jersey, Long Island, pretty much in the tri-state area, going up every single night. And I started in New York City. I didn't really start comedy until I moved here, and yeah, happy to be here. I never expected life to take me to this point, but here we are doing comedy in New York City, like the mecca of stand-up. It's pretty crazy, and it's real to me, but it feels like what I'm supposed to be doing right now.
Yeah, right on. We have interviewed, I'm not sure how many comedians at this point, and I think
7.
you're actually like the first one that's from New York. And like you
Oh,
said,
wow.
it like
He's
it's like,
from
I'm from Texas, but first
but
one.
you're like
Texas.
doing comedy in New York.
Wow, that's surprising. Where are
Yeah.
you based?
We've had people from all over,
Was Florida,
Missouri, Alabama,
yeah, Missouri, Alabama, yeah, Southern
Kentucky.
Alabama.
A lot of Southerners, so far. And yeah, I have this show booked so far out. Comedians are like one group of people that are like they'll book themselves on a show. It's super easy. Everybody's really eager. Yeah, so I have so many of them, but you're like the first working New York comedian that we've had since we started doing this as part of our network. So the comedy show is actually only a couple of months, if that, old. It's a kind of almost, I don't know if I call it a side project, but it's something that we enjoy, and I wanted to feature more. And although I don't do comedy myself, I'm super into it. So any opportunity that I have to help somebody kind of grow their audience or to learn or to chat, and I've
So
made
like
the
this is slowly turning into him talking about a certain photo he has taken with somebody.
no,
Getting
no,
there.
we don't have
Every
we,
episode.
no,
What's this
we,
photo?
we don't have to talk about the time I met Jim Norton. I wasn't
Yeah.
gonna bring it up. I wasn't gonna bring it up.
Definitely
Also,
where that was heading.
also a New York comedian, by the way.
Wait, where
But
are you both calling from? Like, where are you two based in?
I'm in PA, which is Pennsylvania, and he is in
Thanks
Ohio.
for explaining what PA stands
Yeah, I
for.
was about to say, I know what that is.
It's,
Like,
a lot of people don't.
I'm a production.
Papua New Guinea, just in case. Like I didn't know.
I'm from Paris, Texas. No?
Right. Well, like,
Some say one of the nicer Parises now.
yeah.
I have a friend. He's a Houston comic, and my favorite joke of his is, he says, "My dad's from Paris, Texas, and the main difference between Paris, Texas, and Paris, France, is that in Paris, Texas, they pronounce baguette with an F."
That's a funny joke. I enjoy
Who do
it.
you normally interview? You're starting interviewing more comics, but what kinds of people?
Oh man, we do it all. This show actually, our network started exclusively doing paranormal, aliens, and Bigfoot content.
That's dope.
Yeah, and then that kind of turned into, well, like we're having fun and we have other things that we actually like more than those topics. So like now we have a true crime show. We have a horror movie channel. We do other cinema. We do comedy. We do. I mean, we got to show pretty much everything. It's if somebody's interesting or cool, we'll talk to them. We pro wrestling. Um, we did a live game show off of our channel a few months back. We make films. We did a documentary last year, and so this has kind of just become a an outlet for us to be creative. But yeah, it started with like, let's talk about ghosts and alien abductions and Bigfoot.
Basically, just letting Drew live out his fantasy till he realizes it's a waste of time, and then we'll be done.
Right.
He has some
Yeah.
breakthroughs someday, but there's a lot of coping going on.
99% of this show is coping, and we're coming up on a year. We've been doing this for a year. We've grown a lot. It's actually kind of impressive. We started out kind of out of the gate, the paranormal community. Like everyone knows us, and we kind of, well, when I say we, I made a couple of enemies in the paranormal community. So I
Enemies,
kind of,
why? Because you like took a certain stance on something that rubbed people the wrong way, or like,
yeah. Well, there's a lot of grifting that goes on in that community. Believe it or not, I know that might be shocking to hear, that people might not be super honest when it comes to Bigfoot and paranormal. But yeah, it essentially went from like, I enjoy talking about this stuff and presenting a platform to have conversations with, and when I say para celebrities, I mean like we've have spoken to some really top tier names in that community, and there's a lot of people that are just very dishonest and take people's money, and I just started to call them out on it. Like, it started to bother me. Like, I couldn't
I
just
mean,
sit idly by.
don't get him wrong. We do that too, but we're not as blatant about it.
well,
Yeah,
well,
we're
if it makes
honest.
you feel better, the whole comedy industry is also full of grifters
Grift.
and
Yeah,
shady
yeah,
people, and all that jazz.
So we
yeah.
talked a lot about our podcast though, and this is about
It's about you.
you, right? So I do have a question. Of course, this is the only question I'm going to have the entire night. But what was that first kind of moment when it clicked in your head that you said, "Damn, I really want to be a comedian"? Was it watching the Cosby Show?
Well, I knew I wanted to go to New York City because super funny. I actually saw Bill Cosby live before all that, all the shit came
Yeah,
out about him.
last week. Uh-huh.
Yeah, last week. Well, didn't he go on tour after he got out of
I'm
jail?
fairly sure he did. Yeah.
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
I remember he came to. I graduated from the University of Texas at Austin, and he came and performed. And I went and saw him as like a sophomore in college, and he just like sat on a chair and just told stories the whole time. And then a year later, like everything came out, which apparently was really spurred by Hannibal Buress, kind of
Yeah.
talking about it in his stand-up special, which really is kind of crazy to think that like just one person with a platform, if they bring up some dirt, like that can be the flame that lights the fire. But I think to me it was just doing that first open mic in New York City. I was living with a friend from college. He and I moved into a room together with a friend of ours, that and the room opened up because of COVID-19. The only reason I'm in New York City is because of COVID. I had a job that went remote during the pandemic, and I was getting a lot of cabin fever being stuck in Austin. And I just thought I saw a slim window of like, if I don't leave Texas now, I'll never leave. So the opportunity came. I moved into this person's apartment in Brooklyn, and the person I was sharing a room with was also interested in comedy, and he invited me to go to an open mic with him. And it was weird. It was like a sleepy open mic. It was like a 3 p.m. on like a Wednesday or something like that. And there was just
Wow.
something about that experience where it almost felt like spiritual to me. Like something just like clicked in my brain. It was like a feeling I never felt before. But I had done some stand up before that. Like I did like two mics in Austin, Texas, one of which was at a cafe in front of one person, and the other of which I was too scared to even go up when they called my name. So I left the venue. And then I did like a random kind of like goofy gig abroad when I was studying abroad, but that felt more like oh, I'm just going to do this for shits and giggles rather than like a pursuit. But once I did that first open mic in New York, it was like a drug. And I feel like I've been going hard ever since. And by hard, I mean pretty much every week since that week in July 2021, going up like at least 5 to 6 nights a week, multiple spots. Starting from the open mic scene, which basically is in New York City, it's so overly saturated. Like there's at least 30 to 40 mics a day you can go to. Whereas like if you're in a random small town or even a smaller city, you'd be lucky to hit up multiple spots in one night. But here, you could do 7 mics a day easily, and I kind of graduated from that level. It took probably 2 years of doing that before I really started to get consistently booked on shows, starting to get more road gigs. But I'd say I'm in between open mic level and the level of like being a club comic. So a lot of bar shows late at night, kind of like really rural road gigs with like good audiences, but it involves me taking like a 3 hour bus from Port Authority and then
Right.
getting home at like 3 in the morning for a show that I get paid in pizza, like that kind
Yeah.
of. But I certainly feel confident knowing that feels like the work has paid off. Like there hasn't been a moment where it felt like all this was for nothing. I can clearly tell like the longer I've done it, the more opportunities have came for me and like almost like exponentially increasing in that way. So I don't know, and New York's so endless. Like I feel like I've been in the city now for 3 years, and I still feel like I'm discovering new parts of the scene because there's so many different kinds of rooms. Because there's parts of Brooklyn where it might be like a very like hipster, more like woke, like social justicey kind of room. And then you might be like deep in the Bronx and the room's just full of like Dominican and black people, or you might be in New Jersey with just a bunch of, Jersey Shore Italians, and kind of each room dictates different kinds of jokes, a different approach to the audience. And I think it's just been my philosophy has just been like hitting as many different kinds of rooms as possible just to get more experience to know how to react to different situations, so that hopefully at the end of the day, if I'm actually, really touring and going across the country, I can be put into a random room in a city I've never been to and have enough, I guess, tools on my belt to know how to work with that crowd.
Yeah. I've always heard that like the most challenging room is a black room, and that if once you're able to kind of crack that room and they accept you, it's also the most rewarding. Being able to get laughs in that environment, and like, would you say that that is a true assessment based on what you have experienced, or is that maybe an overblown kind of myth?
No, I'd say that's definitely true. I mean, not to toot my horn, but I actually do pretty well in those rooms. I actually do better in those rooms than I do in more club like rooms. But I mean, that might also just be like part of my Houston background. Like Houston and New York are very different vibes, but there's still that like level of like racial diversity. Like growing up, I was like the minority in like the public schools I went to. So most of my
Mm.
classmates were like black and Hispanic. So it almost felt like it wasn't until college that most of my friends were more like white people, I guess. So, and I do think there's an element of truth to that. It actually reminds me of a story of like a comic where she's a single mother, right? And she's a single mom and has all this material about the trials and tribulations of, just how difficult of a life that is. And those jokes will work really well in, a club spot in the Upper West Side or Tribeca or something. But when she's done those jokes in black rooms, like they've bombed, because it's like it's more common for like kind of more broken homes or like difficult life situations where it's kind of like your sob story is not that interesting. Like say something deeper. Like we're all dealing with this shit. What's going on. So, and I think it requires a level of like, I guess, cultural understanding, but not in a way where you're kind of like a, I don't know, like a, it has to be genuine. Like, and I think you have to be able to connect to the audience without either making your own race a caricature or caricaturing the race there, but also acknowledging it at the same time. It's weird. It's but I've heard that. You're not the first person to tell me that. Like, if you do well in those rooms, then you can do well in any room.
Yeah, yeah. Like you're kind of like a made man in comedy when you figure that out. I think I originally heard that from, I don't know. Big J Okerson has so many stories about coming up in black rooms in Philadelphia and stuff. That's probably where I originally heard it, but it's
And
something
Bill
that's
Burr
echoed.
too. Bill
Yeah,
Burr told me. I mean, because Bill Burr got his start in Boston, but when he moved to New York, he was doing tons of rooms in Harlem, and that was, at least in interviews, how he described like where he really got good. Just learning how to make an audience that immediately kind of is looking at you as the enemy. Because it's one
yeah,
thing to walk into a room where it's neutral and everybody's just there to have a good time. But if you walk into a room, the first thing's like, all right, you're the only white guy on this all black lineup. Like, we're already going to not look at you too favorably. So it's like you almost have to do more work to flip the audience onto your side.
yeah. And then once you get them, you have them, and then you'll have them forever because they'll remember it. So it's
Yeah,
like it's one of those like really challenging things for a comic to go out and do, and it kind of solidifies their personality a little bit.
my
It,
first, you just made me think of this. My first year doing comedy in the city, I did an open mic on the second to last train stop right underneath the subway deep in the Bronx. Like about probably the most north in the Bronx I've ever done any comedy. And I did really well at this random open mic, and one person that was randomly sitting and watching that mic ended up being a producer that produced regular shows at a venue called the Bitter End in Greenwich Village, which is a very famous venue. It's not as much, it's more of a strictly live music venue these days, but that venue is where George Carlin got his start. It's where Taylor Swift played early gigs of hers, and just this idea that always being on, and no matter like how remote or random of like a location you are for performing comedy, you never know who's going to be in that audience that could hook you up with an amazing opportunity.
yeah, yeah. Is there any venue that you have worked that is iconic in that regard? Is I guess I don't know. Does the Apollo still run shows?
The Apollo does, but not as regularly. It'll be more like, oh, they might do a comedy show like once a month or once every other month, and it ends up being more of a showcase. But there isn't a regular comedy presence there. I mean, a lot of the big clubs are still operating. Anything from Broadway Comedy Club, Greenwich Village Comedy Club, The Stand, the Comedy Cellar, But I think a big movement I've seen in the city is a lot more independent venues showing up. So these are comedy clubs that are created and owned by comedians. And just over the past year, I've probably seen like 4 or 5 new clubs owned by comedians pop up. So I think there's almost like a shift in focus away from, I guess, the big clubs in Manhattan being the main place people perform. You're seeing, particularly in Brooklyn, a lot of these kind of DIY comedy owned clubs popping up.
I think that, and I could be completely off base here, but I think that's kind of a product of COVID lockdowns, right? Like there was not a lot going on in comedy at that point. You weren't allowed. So, I remember people were doing outdoor shows in parks and going up on roofs. Or here in Pennsylvania, Sojals was, still up and running. So a lot of New York comedians were coming to PA to go to Sojals a lot, and even drive-in shows and stuff. So I think a lot of that uh, is coming from, it's kind of left over from, we're going to have to, if in order to perform, we have to figure out how to do this on our own because clubs aren't even allowed to do it right now.
Yeah,
So
and I would say even like the whole world of TikTok and Instagram, I think, is very much pushing a more like DIY approach to building a following and gaining fame. Like the traditional model of like you just work your way in the club rooms, then you kind of like naturally elevate. It's no longer as clear of a path to sort of reach, a level of being able to make money as a comic. It's less clear. There's more avenues to kind of get to that level. I mean, who's the guy that got, oh gosh, why am I blanking on his name? The big TikTok star that became a huge Matt Rife. That's
yeah,
like a case in point. Like someone who TikTok is really how they like elevated their way to the top and was selling out rooms of 10,000 people at least in a much quicker time than someone that's been a working comic for 20 years. It would take them that long to get those kinds of rooms.
yeah, I mean, kind of like goals and outcomes have changed a lot in comedy too. It used to be like if you really weren't trying to do comedy forever, you'd come up with a tight five, you'd go to LA, and you'd try to sell a premise and your jokes to a sitcom. That was it's pilot season. We got to go to LA. We got to hit the clubs in LA, and obviously that doesn't really exist anymore either. Those TV deals are not as lucrative, and people are more self-made. You have your Gillises and your Theo Vaughns, or your Kill Tonys, that kind of stuff. That there are wider ranges for a comedian to kind of go in different directions. So like it is nice, and it is also very cool to see everybody kind of in control of their own specials at this point with
Yeah,
YouTube versus trying to hope that HBO or Showtime or Netflix will give you some dollars and allow you to have a special. So yeah, I mean, us being so digitally connected certainly has a lot of benefits for comedy, but I also kind of feel like there's a lot of negative side effects to that too. It's it's all crowd work now. Like everything you see on social media is just crowd work.
or reels. It's kind of like it's less so about the 5 minute set and more so kind of chopping up a 13-second joke that you add captions and
Yeah,
graphics to. So it almost changes the way we consume humor. Our attention spans are worse too. So I don't
Oh
even know
yeah.
if people want to sit through like an hour-long special anymore in the same way they used to.
I mean, I guess I'm kind of that age group where I still remember the old ways. So, I still sit down and I can watch an hour special, or I can get through a movie without looking at my cell phone. But I guess, most people, then younger kids, they don't know any different. They grew up with two or three screens at one time. So it does make sense in that regard. But
And I see
um,
a lot of that generational tension. Like there are a lot of older comics and olders are wrong with you. We'll say like just 30 plus in New York City that they really are slightly envious, but also slightly kind of like frustrated with the fact that, you're seeing these 25, 26 year olds that have been doing comedy for maybe 6 months, that due to like a large social media following or just their ability to create viral reels or getting better spots, even though if you like went to go see that person live, you can kind of tell they've only been doing comedy for 6 months. So you're kind of just like that. The quality isn't there, but their way of making it quality kind of post show, sometimes it feels like people are performing for the future because they know that they're really not there for the audience, they're there for the video footage. It's a
Yeah,
different reality.
yeah, and that absolutely I think would show. That would be pretty glaring for not just the experienced comedians, but for everybody. If you're at a club, you're gonna realize that this person who just went up in the middle probably should have been opening, and that's my thing though. Like everybody also now thinks that they can engage, right? Like, do you have a lot of people who are? It's not even necessarily the historical theme of a heckle. It's like everybody's flipping through their phones, and every time they move their thumb, there's more crowd work and interaction, and these younger crowds are almost kind of uh, I don't want to say like what's the word I'm looking for? Like bred to think that it's okay. Like they're almost kind of brought into the scene thinking like this is going to be a give and take scenario.
More people go to I mean, especially the younger crowds go to the shows explicitly with the hope that that crowd work dynamic will happen. And I mean, you'll see comedian, I want to say, who is it, like Jessica Kirsten, or I don't, maybe I'm she did a whole special, just the whole special was solely crowd work. Or like another guy, like fudging up his name, but Phil Henley or something like that, that they don't even show up on stage with any written material. They've just gotten so good at making that dynamic be their entire set. But it's kind of repetitive. Part of me wonders if like the popularity of it, it's because like there's so many jokes that you can find on Twitter or online where it's almost like every single topic has been slammed with like thousands of different takes on it, where like crowd work is like the one thing that you couldn't just tweet about. You would actually have to like have some sort of live experience in order for that moment to happen. Maybe that's why it's kind of moved to that. But I don't really go into sets with the intention to crowd work. Sometimes I'll have like a question or something just for fun, but I tend to rely more on my own material. But if someone engages in the crowd, then of course, like I'll allow that genuine moment to happen. But I'm much more interested in just trying to like come up with like, a good 5, 10, 15 minutes of material just out of thin air rather than, I guess, rely on someone else to help me get to that point.
Well, what's your writing process? Because it seems like every comedian that I've spoken to, they all have a different process. I'm someone that I write a lot, so I'm very meticulous in that regard. I will sit down and I write and I write and I write, and then once it's written, if I've taken the time to put it down, that's how I want it. Regardless of what it is, whether it's like comedic or horror or something that I'm doing, setting up for a movie or whatever. Like once I have that on paper, that is exactly how it needs to be. But obviously that doesn't always work in comedy because you have to then take that in front of a crowd and see how it hits. And if things don't land, that doesn't mean that necessarily that your premise is bad. You just got to figure out how to get to the laugh with that. But what like, are you the type that will sit down and kind of write feverishly, or are you more of the figure this out on stage?
No, I'd say like I always travel with like a notebook and my phone notes app too. So I feel like I'm inspired by things randomly at like different intervals of the day. Like I feel like subway rides in the city is when I'm probably way more intentional just about like thinking through a certain bit or material. But there are so many things I'm inspired by where I'll just like jot things on the fly. Or sometimes it's not even like something I'm inspired by. I'll just like randomly think like, oh, I kind of want to try a joke this way. And I'd say like there are definitely one-liners where like there's a very clear like memorization of like this is exactly how I want like the progression of words to be for the joke. But there are some bits where like I feel like there's a little leeway to kind of experiment with how I present that bit. And I think based on the audience or how the flow of my set's going so far, I'll kind of adapt that on the fly, but kind of the same core of that joke exists. But I'm a big improviser. Like I like doing more physical comedy, act outs, impressions. So there's still like a lot of leeway to kind of come up with things when I'm on stage, which only becomes easier the longer I do it. But I mean, I did acting and improv before I did stand up, and I've always enjoyed public speaking. In fact, public speaking comes very easily to me. It's more so like the like regular social interactions with people is where I really struggle with. But being on stage has always felt comfortable to me. Like I've never had any issues with that.
Yeah, that's interesting when you hear people say that. That's kind of how I am as well. Like I have never shied away from being the center of attention, even though in a smaller scenario, I actually hate being the center of attention. So I'm kind of like I'm with you there. Um, like if I've ever performed in any way, it would be like I real briefly was a wrestler, right? So it's kind of you go out on stage, you get into a ring, you have this entire crowd of people that are there feeding off of your energy or whatever. Um, that's intoxicating. So I imagine it's probably the same as being on stage and getting laughs with jokes. But like the second I'm out of that situation, and if I'm at Walmart and there's like seven people too close to me, I'm like, oh my god, I need these people to get away from me because the autism is starting to show. Like I need everyone out of here. So I actually like I relate to that 100%.
I think it's because I think it's because there's an element of control. Like when you're on stage, like everybody's eyes are focused on you and you kind of get to be the creator. Whereas like in more, I guess, organic social interactions, you don't have that same
Yeah.
element of dictating the pace of things or how things flow.
Like when you're on a stage, you expect those eyes, but when you're in line at Walmart, it's like, why the f are you staring at me, bro? Like, I'm not stealing anything. Like, if you stop doing so many self checkouts, if you're gonna stand there and just watch me as I'm doing it, why don't you grab some of my items and help me while you're staring at me? That's kind of
That's one thing I miss. There's no Walmarts in New York City. You have to like go out into the burbs or like into Jersey. Feels like that's like a presence in my life. You've actually made me realize I miss.
I don't know if I'm happy or sad for you that you miss Walmarts. I'm
This is
sure
gonna
you
sound
have.
crazy, but my first job out of college, I got hired to drive a giant 26-foot long peanut around America called the Planter's Nutmobile, which, if you're
Hell
trying to
yeah.
imagine in your mind, it's basically the Planter's peanut version of the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile. And I spent a lot of days of my life for like 8-hour days in Walmart parking lots in rural parts of America. I feel like I have a very special relationship in my mind with like the people of Walmart and just interacting and just like shooting shit.
Yeah. Oh man, that I've never heard of that. Like obviously I know the Oscar Mayer one, but the Planner's Nut one, that's news to me. A and B, like how did like Bang Bus not ever take take that and use it for their videos? Like
Yeah, I mean, what could be better than busting a nut inside of a nut?
right,
That's
the
a good idea.
Nutmobile.
Actually, but the at the time, both the Wienermobile and the Nutmobile were owned by the same company, Kraft Heinz. So I trained alongside the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile program. Like they were, and
Damn.
I spent some time like driving behind the wheel of that as well. Like they're called the hot doggers, and the peanut drivers we were called the peanutters. So I mean I'm still in touch with some friends of mine that I met that drove the Wienermobile the same time I drove the Nutmobile.
Yeah, but I guess the hot doggers get more recognition though. Like you're
Oh
both
yeah,
you're both super cool, but only one of you get to actually land on the moon and talk to home base, and then there's only one person who was the first person to step on the moon, right? That's the
true.
hot doggers.
But I got to
And
dress up as Mr. Peanut. The Wienermobile people don't get to say that.
that's true. Did you have top hat and monocle and everything?
Yeah, no, it was like the whole costume. Like I even remember like there was one time we were doing an event where we were in the parade at I guess it was the Pride Parade in Chicago, and I had to wear Mr. Peanut through the sunroof of the Nutmobile. It was terrible because it was like a really long day. It was like 95 degrees outside, but the costume adds 40 degrees Fahrenheit to whatever the
Yeah.
external temperatures are. And because I had to be in it for such a long time, I had to like wear a diaper. I had like a camelback thing inside of me, and it's just crazy. People were flashing me like, Mr. Peanut, we love you. Ah, people were throwing dildos at my head. I was like, is this life? Like, it was one of those moments that, when you're on your deathbed and your whole life flashes before your eyes, like, that will definitely be on that highlight reel for sure.
Riding the Nutmobile in Pride Parade and having dildos thrown at you.
Yeah, you're just like,
Definitely now on my bucket list. That's not a scenario that I thought ever could have existed, but
what's
you're
the
right.
Talking Heads song? They're like, you might find yourself behind the wheel of a large Nutmobile. You might ask yourself, well, how did I get here?
Yeah. But so uh did do you want to continue to grow as a comedian in New York? As you said, it's the Mecca. But also, like, Rogan is creating this huge scene in Texas right now, and a lot of comics are, between Texas and Tennessee, kind of creating new meccas, right? So, would there be a scenario where you could see yourself maybe going back to Texas and working that area again?
I could. That still feels like a bit of ways off for me because part of me wants to feel like if I go back to Austin, I would want to be at a level like that when I move there, like I'm already kind of like a known name and I'll be getting consistent spots everywhere. But yeah, I mean, especially since it was weird, like so many people from New York City moved to Texas after the pandemic, and it was like a sign and trade deal. I got traded, and I moved to New York City, and Austin's really taken off. Like the mothership, Shane Gillis. I want to say even Chappelle might have a place down there now. It's
Hmm.
Austin is very much at this point, I would say, probably like the third biggest scene in the country behind LA and New York City. I think it's gotten to that level of notoriety, and just in terms of the amount of money and opportunities going out there. Like I think it there's a much faster track too for you to make money as a touring comic in Texas. Like I had a friend in Houston. He was doing comedy probably for 2 years, and he was already just getting steady road gigs and paid for money. Whereas like New York, there's so many comedians out here that it takes you a while to, I guess, build more of a household name for yourself. But I don't know. Part of me likes being in New York because it's sort of like the birthplace of it in the city or in the country. There's part of me feels like I need to like pay my dues here. It, I guess going back to the whole like Mecca metaphor, it's kind of like you got to make your pilgrimage and work out rooms in New York City, the same rooms that Jerry Seinfeld was in and Norm Macdonald was in, and pretty much every major comedian I know of has at least did some time in New York City, living there and working on their craft.
And a lot of times they'll start to call you soft when you leave New York. That's kind of the all those LA comics are soft. You know, they do 4 shows a week. We do 5 shows a day. Kind of. There's a mentality that kind of like once you leave New York, you're also not as good as you were when you were in New York.
There's even a phrase for it. It's kind of like if you want to get money as a comedian really fast, you live in LA, or I guess you could even say like Austin. But if you want to get good at comedy, you live in New York. Just because I think it's the dynamics of the room. Because even Austin today, like Austin still really isn't that like diverse of a place. It kind of feels like a big like bubble to me. Whereas New York has so many different random neighborhoods of like completely different ethnicities and cultures and vibes where you have to learn how to do well in a lot of different types of rooms. Whereas like Austin feels more of like the same kind of room but different levels to it, if that makes sense. Like when I
Yeah,
lived in Austin, it was mainly like a very like kind of white tech tech bro Texany kind of town, and even though more people move there, that's still kind of the energy there. But because Austin doesn't have a Bronx or Harlem or you know a Bed Stuy and in that sense.
you know, I was horrified to find out that Arlen, Texas, isn't a real place.
Yeah, but it's I would say based on my own lived experiences, pretty damn close to what a small town in Texas would feel like.
That at least feels a little better. Like, because my existence was shook for quite some time when I found out that Arlen wasn't real. Uh, I don't, that kind of has nothing to do with what the topic was, but just Texas in general. Uh, so you said that you did some acting and improv. New York obviously is pretty famous for improv. Would you, considering you also said you like to do characters and stuff, would you ever try to go out on a audition for SNL?
Sure, yeah. I mean, if that opportunity came across, I would absolutely audition. Sorry, I'm just plugging in my laptop. It's dying on me.
Nah, you're all good. Yeah, I know
Uh,
it's kind of not the easiest thing to just decide you're gonna go audition in front of Lauren or whatever, but
to
uh,
me, they all inform each other. Like, I'm not really interested in taking improv classes or like getting involved in the improv community at like a high level in that sense because I know a lot of cast members of SNL. That's kind of like how they got their foot in the door there. They kind of graduated to the top level of like Second City or UCB or something like that. But there's a lot of overlap, like a lot of improvisers. You'll see them around in the stand-up scene, and there are a lot of shows that are like a fusion of the two art forms. And I, to me, I lean more towards stand-up just because I like the creative control of it. Maybe that's why I never liked group projects growing up. I kind of like the fact that I don't have to rely on other people to create with what I want to create, but I still feel like it's really good practice to like do improv classes, or even like New York City has a very thriving like I would say like a clown community is how I would describe it, and not clowns in the traditional sense of like face paint, red nose, but like clowning as like a style of performance where I would say like clowning is like comedy at its rawest form in a way where you don't even have to make sense on stage when you're clowning. It's more so like how your voice and your physical act outs are provoking laughter from the audience. Like sometimes like interacting with those spaces also really informs I guess my stand up too. I just think there's so many freaking talented people here that it would be dumb not to like try to work your way around the city and just like be in those rooms too, just to get the inspiration and ideas from them.
yeah, right on. did you watch SNL growing up, or do you watch it now? I talk about it like it doesn't exist anymore.
Nah, yeah. I mean, I watched SNL growing up. I watched a lot of Comedy Central. Like the first big sketch show that really was, I guess, a big influence on me is actually Key and Peele when they were
Okay.
doing their sketches on Comedy Central. Like that was the stuff that all my friends in high school and I were like sending clips of to each other. And Whose Line Is It Anyways was also probably the first sketch show, or not sketch, but like improv sketch kind of show that I watched growing up. Like that was actually probably the first comedy I watched in my life. I would like watch with my parents, and the OG version with like Drew Carey and you know
See, that's
Wayne-
not even the OG version. The OG version was the British
before
dude.
Drew Carey. There's
Yeah. Uh,
wow.
it wasn't even an American show. I think it was one of the Canadian crossover shows. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. JC, you should look that up. But Ryan Stiles and Colin Mockery were both still on it, but the original host was a British dude. And yeah, I watched it a lot when I was growing up as well. I was a big fan of that. And Kids in the Hall was one that I was a kid that was super, super depressed for my age, like elementary school. Like I'm a kid that like I relate to comedy on so many levels, basically because of how awful and depressing my existence is. So like uh I remember being in like not even first grade, and like my dad falling down the stairs because he took a bunch of pills to try to kill himself, right? And so like while he's off in the mental hospital, my mom has like some other dude in the apartment and shit. So like I end up like I have this terrible, awful white trash childhood, and I would always just hang out in my bedroom after school, and I'd watch Comedy Central and Kids in the Hall and the SNL reruns, and then once that would kind of run through, I would watch that Who's Line with the British dude, and that would just be like my day every single day. So I have a deep love for sketch and improv because it even as a kid, before I even understood what was happening, it was like a good coping mechanism, and it helped me escape the world that I lived in.
Yeah, that's actually really beautiful. That made me think of like my own journey to why I started like comedy. It was actually because growing up when I was in middle school, um, my dad was never out of the picture, but he certainly wasn't like he, after my parents' divorce, he wasn't really there at all. Taking care of us. So raised by a single mom, and she got breast cancer, like stage 3 breast cancer, and
Yeah.
her coping mechanism of dealing with cancer was super dark, messed up jokes about like her own mortality, death, and really crazy things for like a 12-year-old kid to like have to process. But it kind of like opened up this whole world of like, whoa, comedy, you can literally take like something negative and flip it on its head and almost like take it to your own advantage. And I think it was like because of my mom's sense of humor that got me somehow interested in wanting to look up comedy. And I think it was like that's how I started with Chris Rock and Louis C.K. And I remember just like binge watching Louis specials, and Chris Rock was like the first comedy album I ever owned. Just like listening to that on like an iPod Nano, like very retro.
That's actually interesting that you say that. I don't know if this is the reason or not, but CK and Rock came up through Hollywood together. A lot of Chris Rock's movies was like they were written by Louis C.K. So the fact that you kind of found them as your comedians, as that were your gateway to this, that interests me on that level too, because this is you're watching Pootie Tang, and then you're watching the guy who wrote Pootie Tang. So
Well, subliminally, I think I was even influenced to move, and I only recently had this realization. One of my favorite shows as a kid was a show called Everybody Hates Chris, which was
Okay.
like a autobiographical depiction of Chris Rock's upbringing in Brooklyn. And I think that's when I started to romanticize life in New York City and just feeling, whoa, it'd be
Right.
so cool to like live in the hustle and bustle of it all. This guy's so funny,
Did you say
all of
it's
that.
Man,
coming
he's
back?
so cool.
Oh, I did. I saw that they're rebooting it or doing a animated
Yeah,
version.
it's a cartoon now, but yeah, it's coming back. Um, something that I I never made that correlation at all, but so many sitcoms really do kind of put New York, specific,
Seinfeld.
yeah, on this like weird plane of existence where it does feel both larger than life, but also super obtainable. Like
Definitely.
I've never really got into Friends,
Have
but
you
like if you
watched Have you
pop
watched King
Friends
of
on,
Queens? He suffered every day of his life.
I yeah, but
Don't move to New York.
he went home to Leah Remini and a
Yeah,
decent
and look what
house.
happened in the final episode. It's no spoilers on here, but it doesn't end well.
Talk about a final season kind of punching you in the gut. That's one that went places I never really wanted to see Doug go. But
Yeah,
yeah, you're right. But it just like it seems like, but
Doug.
it is like even though it's like this grand thing that you're seeing, you're just the way that TV has always presented it. It's like here are these people who are getting by. Here are normal folks. Here are your 7 cool roommates that you get to hang out with so that you could pay your rent and all of the zany adventures.
Yeah.
Because like
And
as a sick,
they're all not just crackheads and weirdos.
yeah, so yeah, that's absolutely true. One for me, and I'm probably the only one in the world that remembers it, but Shasta McNasty was one. It went one season on UPN 25 years ago, probably at this point. But it was about a band that were like living in New York and just kind of like I am of that post 80s 90s generation where like being a slacker was the coolest shit in the world. So even just kind of being raised in that environment, all of like the slacker content was all
I,
almost like New York based.
if you want to talk about
Mhm.
major changes, I mean that was the whole vibe of Austin before it became Silicon Valley. I mean, Richard Linklater, Dazed and Confused, Willie Nelson. Austin used to be like a sleepy hippie town that was kind of this liberal bubble inside the state of Texas. And um, I one thing I also feel like I romanticize about New York is I grew up the hip hop scene in Houston's really big. I grew up really loving rap and R&B, and I think that same desire to of like New York City being the mecca of stand up, it's also the mecca of hip hop. The Bronx, birthplace of rap, and also kind of wanting to just be in that space and just kind of walk around and be like, whoa, like, so you're telling me this is where like the Sugar Hill gang was? This is where
Yeah.
Nas was, Jay Z, Biggie? Like, this is crazy.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Jay-Z, the New York song. There's like you just kind of hear that. Like this is where dreams are made of or whatever. Yeah,
Not what's her name's new cover of the song. Wet Dream Tomato.
I
Wet
No,
tomato?
no, dead. Yeah, the Hawk Tuah girl. She
Oh,
was
God.
on. Yeah, she was on. That one dude who is a
Bill Maher.
Bill Maher. Yeah, she
Yeah.
was on Bill Maher, and he asked her about what music she listened to, and she said about that song, and it reminded her of saying "Wet Dream Tomato." New York, Wet Dream. Yeah, so now that's the only thing that I can hear.
You know, I went probably a week and a half blissfully forgetting Hawk Tuah until right
I'm
now.
sorry.
Like
She's more
that
famous than all of us combined.
no, it's not hard to be more famous than
That's
me.
true.
Don't throw
Oh,
yourself.
because I mean, if I could go have a random video of me just being an absolute slut go worldwide famous, I would totally do it.
Yeah, no, we don't slut shame on.
Yeah, no,
On
if
the
that's
No,
Western
no,
Digital
no,
Network.
no. I do slut shame on here. We just don't have a slut on here for me to shame that I'm aware of.
But yeah, man, I cannot remember. Like her appearance on Bill Maher was the last I've heard of her until right now that you just brought her up.
She
So.
was at WWE SummerSlam and nobody cared.
Was she?
Did you know that she was in the building with us while we were there?
No, I had no
Oh,
idea.
wow.
Yeah. We basically got the rub off, secondhand rub from just being there, which I'm pretty sure she's probably known for her rubs, but
All right.
all right, I'm done.
Oh shit, man!
She
We
probably
are.
has, like a contract. She's probably got a contract offer from Pornhub, probably.
Oh yeah,
Like,
she did.
She
had a lot.
did. She
That
turned.
pole
She said she
vaulter
turned
in
it
the
down.
Olympics. That pole vaulter in the Olympics that had that big junk. I think Pornhub offered him like $1 million or something. Something crazy.
I only know the bad breakdancer. I don't really pay attention to the Olympics, so like that Australian breakdancer who is like terrible is the only.
Gosh.
And the Turkish shooter who literally
hated
hated his wife so much that he had to prove her wrong by entering a sport that involves guns.
I thought
Yeah.
I thought the rumors that that guy low key was like an assassin. Like that was
the joke. That was the joke. But seeing Turkey's records with people shooting, pretty sure the last Turkish shooter was the guy that shot Pope John Paul II. So not a good track record here, guys.
Yeah,
no, there was Hidu Turkoglu for the Orlando Magic. He was a decent shooter. That was a dumb joke.
It would have landed better if I knew anything about basketball.
Yeah, we don't know basketball, so
that's all right.
You can't make basketball jokes here.
I live in Pennsylvania, and I'm nowhere near Philadelphia, so basketball is not really a thing here.
Oh yeah, I guess
we
have
here, but
we are almost at that hour mark. That was a fast hour.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, that was a fun chat. So we have a couple of minutes, and I always like to offer our guests the last couple of moments to promote any gigs, any links, any projects. Go ahead and get your plugs in.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to be a part of the 5th Borough Comedy Festival, which is actually starting in about 12 days from now. I'll be on a couple shows on that, which is on Staten Island. So comics from around the city and from across the country fly in to do a ton of different shows there. And I'm really excited because I'm going to be on a character roast battle at the 5th Borough Comedy Festival, where I will be playing the role of what's his name? Matthew Brooks, the Trump shooter. I'm going to be as his character roasting someone playing Melania Trump.
Oh boy,
that will be the roast. So
just make sure your jokes land.
Yes. Well, I don't know.
Being
I feel
streamed
like if
anywhere?
jokes don't land, then that would be pretty on point for Matthew Brooks. Maybe just blaze him by the ear. Yeah, but you can check that out. Follow 5th Borough Comedy Festival on Instagram. You'll see all the lineups for that, and that'll be a great time. And other than that, if you're interested in keeping up to date with any shows I'm a part of, I primarily promote through Instagram, which is just my name, Patrick Thomas Golden. I'm not a big real comedian. I don't post many bits on there, but I do share where I'm at and where I'm performing. But yeah, 5th Borough Comedy Festival. If you're in New York City at all for the last 2 weeks of September, come check out. They're doing a ton of shows for it.
Awesome. Yeah, hey man, thanks for talking to us. I had a good time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, this was a blast. Time flew by. Y'all are easy to talk to. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, hey, no problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah, everybody check out his links, follow him on socials. I'm going to go ahead and hit our outro, and we'll see everybody on the next one.
Awesome. Peace.
The preceding program has been brought to you by the Watchers Podcast Network. If you enjoyed the show, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends to help grow our network. Check us out on all social media platforms, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. And until next time, thanks for your support.